Good morning everybody, it's lovely to be able to speak to you this morning. So welcome to the first virtual history assembly. Today the history team is going to spend a few minutes explaining Black History Month to you and its importance in society today. Now through recent months you may remember seeing lots of different scenes and pictures related to racism and to Black history. Since the resumption of the Premier League in June, players have been taking the knee in a united stand to tackle and remove racism from sport and in society. Demonstrations and protests have been involved in the Black Lives Matter movement since the shocking death of George Floyd in the USA, and there have been dozens of scenes of protesters tearing down statues of former slave profiteers such as Edward Colston that you see. All of this helps us really to understand that racism is a continuing issue in society, and one of the key aims of Black History Month is to raise awareness of this, to try and remove it as an issue for us. The American actress Catherine Ross has said that 2020 has held a mirror up to the world and forced many to see the reality of racism. I'll now hand over to Miss Doherty and Mr Dodkin. They're going to explain the history of the month to you and why we celebrate Black History every year.
We celebrate Black History Month every October and have done since 1987. It's the annual event that remembers and champions the history and achievements of Black people and educates and informs on Black heritage and culture in Britain. Since its inception, it has provided a catalyst for these stories to be told across the UK in schools, museums, libraries, and to be taken home to families. Now, why do we learn about Black history in October? This is largely because of its importance in the African calendar, being a time of plenty in the form of the harvest. But also, it was thought that it was important to raise awareness at the start of the academic year so that important questions about the lives of Black people throughout history could be discussed in lessons throughout the year.
The aim of Black History Month is to build a greater understanding of the diverse world in which we live. David Olusoga, a famous Black historian, has said that Black History Month is a time to shine light on our shared British history and tell the whole story honestly and truthfully, to decolonise and reclaim history and tell stories from the perspective of all people. He said that Black history affects us all because it is British history. For example, raising awareness about the fact that Black people have lived in Britain since the Roman Empire had control in Britain. I'll now hand over to Mr Cooksey and Miss Podmore, who are going to focus on a particular topic that interests and inspires them.
Okay, hiya guys, thanks ever so much, and thanks Mr Dodkin and Miss Doherty, okay? You've heard why Black History Month is so important, and so I would just like to share with you my interest in Black history, because it is something that I'm quite passionate about and I've enjoyed and studied a great deal. And my interest has come from actually, believe it or not, growing up in the Welsh Valleys, where in the 1930s we had a very famous African-American Hollywood singer called Paul Robeson come to film a movie called Proud Valley. Whilst Paul Robeson was there, he decided that one of the things he would do was that he would help the Welsh miners campaign for better working conditions and pay, because he felt that, similar to African Americans, that they needed somebody to basically triumph their cause. And as a result, one of those people that he worked with was actually my grandfather, who was a National Union of Miners official. So Paul Robeson has always been a bit of a hero in our house, to say the least. And it got me thinking, it got me interested in his fight, because when he went back to America, he campaigned extensively for an improvement in African American civil rights through the 40s and the 50s. My interest in Black history was further developed when I became interested in South African history, and in particular, not just the work of Nelson Mandela, but a man called Steve Biko. Steve Biko was one of the great Black campaigners, one of the great Black South Africans who gave his life for the cause. Biko spoke out against apartheid, against the system that was in place suppressing many Black South Africans. And when he spoke out, he became a threat to the white Afrikaner government, who basically had him removed, had him killed. And this story was an inspiration because it was smuggled out of South Africa and became a worldwide phenomenon that actually challenged things. If I was to suggest something to read, I would say to you, please read To Kill a Mockingbird. It is the first book I read on African American civil rights, and I absolutely adored it. Atticus Finch, the lawyer in there, okay, that epitomises where I hope that one day we will all be as a society. The other book I would suggest I'm reading at the moment is Shadow Kings, which is all about the campaign of Ethiopian women against the Italian invasion in the 1930s. And as for films, well, one of my favourite films of all time is Remember the Titans, a story about an American high school football team that come together through desegregation, where black and white students go on to actually win the state championships. All a true story. So that's it for me, guys. Okay, thanks very much.
My favourite aspect of history to study is Black history. I particularly enjoy looking at the different movements across the globe created to reclaim a Black narrative and community, particularly after the devastation of empire. The comparisons between these movements is what fascinates me. Although this could be quite far-reaching, and I can definitely talk about this for hours, I will kind of limit myself and keep myself to just two. I'll start with, very quickly, the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, where Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat and Martin Luther King Jr. first graced the American civil rights movement. What I find particularly interesting about this event is not just how it acts as a facilitator for change in America, but how it also in turn inspires other movements across the world, including, well, a little bit more closer to home, the Bristol bus boycott, okay? The Bristol bus boycott arose from the refusal of the Bristol Bus Company to employ Black or Asian bus crews in the city of Bristol. Beginning in 1955 and led by 4 young West Indian men, the boycott drew national attention to racial discrimination in Britain, and the campaign was supported by national politicians. Now, the Bristol bus boycott lasted 8 years. On the 28th of August 1963, the same day Martin Luther King Jr. made his I Have a Dream speech, buses in Bristol were officially desegregated. The Bristol bus boycott was considered by some to have been influential in the passing of the Race Relations Act in 1965, which made racial discrimination unlawful in public places, and the Race Relations Act in 1968, which extended the provisions of the prior act to include employment and housing. Now, I think what's really important about this is how it starts to demonstrate the impact globally of different events and how one event can act as a facilitator for change worldwide. And I think that's what's really important to study in Black history.
History has proven that people and societies are really stubborn. They tend not to like change. And what tends to make change happen are dramatic events. And that's one thing that 2020 has done. It's provided a catalyst for more positive change in the future. And we're beginning to see already that that is really possible. So for example, history teachers across Britain are really beginning to reflect on the history that they teach. We want our history teaching to be more inclusive, and we've already begun some great work on that. Likewise, nationally, there's been a big drive in giving Black writers, Black performers, the platform that they've never had before. And that in itself is giving a wider range of voices and a greater understanding of the experiences of people within our country. And finally, board members everywhere in industry and in public services are having to really account for the lack of diversity at a senior level. All of these things are going to drive more positive change in the future.
Thank you for listening to the Assembly today. We hope you found it useful and informative. As some next steps really over half term, just have a look out on all sorts of different things to learn more about Black History Month. On Instagram, you look at the various pages we have for English, Vandyke reads, geography, history, all putting out various materials and links and articles for you to have a little look at. There's all sorts of collections of films on Sky, on Netflix, on Disney Plus, to go and have a look at as well, and various different websites that again we will link you to Instagram. So have a wonderful half term, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you after half term.